Nora thought she was heading to a summer camp filled with lakes and crafts, until the bus rolled past the lake and stopped at a gate wrapped in barbed wire. She shifted in her seat, the creak of vinyl beneath her legs, louder than the chatter around her. Outside the foggy window, pine trees gave way to tall grass, and the glint of water, what she assumed was the lake, blurred in the distance. The bus didn't slow. A boy with braces sitting 2 seats behind her whispered, "Wasn't that the lake?" But no one answered. The counselor up front, a man with mirrored sunglasses and a clipboard, stared straight ahead. The air conditioning had stopped working an hour ago. Sweat clung to Nora's neck, and the camp brochure she held in her lap was damp with palm prints. The smiling canoeists on the cover now looked like ghosts. She turned the page again, just to check. Daily crafts, nature hikes, swimming lessons. Her mom had even packed a one-piece and labeled it with her name in Sharpie. The scent of sunscreen still lingered faintly on her skin. As the bus took a sharp turn, gravel crunched beneath the tires. Up ahead, a tall metal fence appeared, topped with loops of barbed wire. A dull gray sign read, "Lark Hill Training Grounds." It didn't say anything about crafts. Nora sat straighter. "This can't be right," she murmured, but no one around her responded. One girl had her earbuds in. A boy in the front was already asleep. The gate creaked open slowly. Beyond it, rows of low buildings with metal siding stretched under a flat sky. No banners, no campers running with marshmallows on sticks, no laughter. The bus hissed to a stop. The man in mirrored sunglasses stood, clipboard in hand. "Disembark, line up by last name." Nora didn't move. Then, sensing eyes on her, she shuffled forward with the others, heart pounding. Gravel crunched beneath her sneakers as she stepped off the bus. The heat hit her like a slap. Thick, unmoving southern air that smelled like sunburnt metal and cut grass. The counselors weren't wearing lanyards or whistles. They wore boots, cargo pants, polo shirts tucked in too tightly. One woman barked something about bags being distributed later. Another ordered them to stand with their hands behind their backs. "Name?" a short man asked as he ticked his clipboard. Nora Beckett." He scanned the page. "Bunk 3A." She nodded, unsure what that meant, and was directed toward a narrow path between buildings. Another girl, Becca, she would learn later, walked beside her without a word. Inside, Bunk 3A, steel-frame beds lined the walls, thin mattresses. One fan in the corner rattled like it had lost the will to live. Nora took a bed in the middle, trying not to wrinkle the sheets as she sat. Her suitcase was already there, oddly neat and tagged with a paper label that read "Property of Larkhill." Across from her, Becca sat cross-legged on her own bed, hands in her lap. She glanced up briefly, then looked away. No one spoke. A bell rang outside. Not a pleasant chime, but something metallic and urgent. "Mess hall," someone muttered. Nora followed the flow of bodies, her limbs heavy. The dining room smelled like damp tile and lukewarm meat. Trays of indistinct food were passed down without eye contact. They were expected to sit silently. A man with a whistle walked the aisles like a prison guard. She barely ate. Afterward, they returned to the bunkhouse. The beds had thin wool blankets, no pillows. The lights flickered once, then dimmed to a dull yellow. No phones, no clocks, no Wi-Fi password tacked to a wall. She changed into a plain t-shirt and lay back, listening to the night. Cicadas hummed outside. A faucet dripped. Somewhere, someone was crying quietly into their sheet. A clipboard rested on a nail by the door. The schedule pinned to it read, 0500, wake up. 0530. Physical training, 0700, chow. The fan sputtered again. She closed her eyes, her chest tight. "This isn't camp," she thought. "This is exile," she whispered to herself in the dark. "This isn't camp. This is exile." Nora wrote a letter home every Sunday. None of them were ever answered. She sat cross-legged on the edge of her bunk, the letter balanced against her knee, the cheap ballpoint pen scratching across the lined paper. Her handwriting had grown smaller over the weeks, tighter, like she was folding her thoughts in on themselves. There was no return address on the envelope. There never was. "Dear Mom and Dad," she began, then paused. The rest came in a slow pour, details about the heat, the routine, the drills that made her arms ache and her mind numb. She wrote about the meals, bland, the nights, loud with insect noise, and the fact that she still hadn't been allowed to call home. She didn't mention the tears that came when the lights went out, or how some mornings she couldn't remember the sound of her sister's laugh. She ended with a single question: Is this really what you wanted for me? She folded the page, slipped it into an envelope, and dropped it into the red outgoing box outside the mess hall. The metal was warm to the touch, as if the letters inside were fermenting under the Carolina sun. Inside the dining hall that day, Becca sat across from her, silently peeling an orange. The girl had a way of making even that seem like a survival ritual. They don't get sent, you know, Becca said, not looking up. What? The letters, outgoing boxes just for show. They collect them every Friday, probably burn them. Nora frowned. How do you know? Becca shrugged. I've been here long enough. She popped a segment into her mouth and chewed slowly. Most people stop writing after the first month. Nora didn't reply. Her stomach clenched, but not from hunger. That afternoon, during equipment inventory, Nora noticed the infirmary door cracked open. A warm scent drifted from within: clean linen, lemon disinfectant, something faintly floral. She lingered near the threshold, pretending to examine a box of gauze. Inside, Mrs. Ellery was folding towels with gentle precision. Her hands moved like she'd done this for decades, like there was comfort in the ritual. Nora stepped closer. Do you need help? Ellery looked up, surprised but not startled. You can fold? Yes, ma'am. Ellery smiled faintly and nodded toward a second stack. They worked in silence. The radio played something old and soft, almost swallowed by the hum of the ceiling fan. After a while, Ellery spoke. Writing letters is a good habit, she said, not looking at Nora, even if no one reads them. Nora didn't answer. Sometimes the writing is more important than the reading, Ellery added, folding one last towel and placing it atop the stack. Keep writing, sweetheart. That night, back in bunk 3A, Nora opened the small drawer beside her bed. Inside, tucked between a Bible and a broken pencil, she found a yellowed envelope. Her heart caught as she unfolded the paper. It was a letter dated 1998, written by someone named Cara. The writing was rushed, uneven. If you're reading this, you're not alone. I lasted 3 months before they let me go. My parents thought this would fix me. It didn't. But I'm still here. You will be too. Nora stared at the paper, her fingers trembling. There was no ending, no return name, just a heart drawn in blue ink. Then a single sentence. Some of us leave. Some of us stay. All of us matter. She folded the letter back into its place, heart thudding. Later that night, she wrote again. This time, it wasn't a letter home. It was one line in a new notebook. They're not coming, but I will. The dorm was still except for the fan and the occasional cough from Becca's bunk. Nora sat upright, listening to the quiet breathe around her. Her eyes were tired, but her mind buzzed. Mrs. Ellery had left something tucked between Nora's folded shirt earlier, a small note scrawled in loopy cursive. Strength doesn't always shout. Fireworks bloomed above Lakewood, but Nora marched in step, wearing khakis in silence. Her boots struck pavement in rhythm with the others, the cadence of their steps echoing off the brick storefronts of Main Street. The 4th of July parade moved in perfect formation, a long line of khaki uniforms and stiff postures. Each Lark Hill trainee carried themselves like a cardboard cutout, expressionless, interchangeable. Nora's eyes stayed forward, her jaw set. The air was heavy with heat and the scent of kettle corn and hot dogs. Children waved plastic flags from folding chairs. Elderly couples leaned forward on benches shaded by crepe myrtles, fanning themselves with programs that listed times for the pie-eating contest and bluegrass band. It should have been cheerful, but to Nora, the red, white, and blue bunting draped across storefronts looked like ribbons at a wake. The command to halt came sharp and clipped. They stopped mid-block, standing like statues. Nora's eyes flicked across the crowd. People clapped politely. Some looked confused. Why were these kids so solemn? Then she saw her. Mrs. Ellery stood near the edge of the crowd, not clapping, just watching. Her hands were clasped in front of her, a wide-brimmed hat shading her eyes. She nodded, once, gently, when her gaze met Nora's. There was no smile, just understanding. Nora's throat tightened, but her body didn't move. Private Coach passed by, muttering, "Good form." His sunglasses hid his eyes, but his voice had that rehearsed firmness. "Freedom is earned, not given." Nora felt the words hit her like a thud and then pass through her like mist, meaningless. After the march, they were granted 15 minutes of community time, a rare allowance. Most cadets milled around the far edge of the festival, supervised but unsupervised. The smell of barbecue hung in the air. A woman in a cherry-printed dress handed out samples of lemonade. Nora took a cup and walked toward the square. A man in suspenders sat alone on a shaded bench, a cane resting against his leg. His hat was tipped slightly to the side, and his paper plate held a half-eaten slice of pecan pie. "Ma'am," he said as Nora passed. His voice was slow and gravelly, but sure. She stopped. "Sir?" "You were the quiet one," he said, tapping his cane lightly. "The girl who didn't blink." Nora hesitated. "Yes, sir." He nodded. "You don't build strength by breaking spirit. Don't let them tell you otherwise." Nora stared at him. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask if she was okay. He just handed her a folded note like it was part of a silent ceremony. Back at Lark Hill, the sun dipped lower behind the trees. The fireworks hadn't started yet, but the buzz in the town lingered in the sky, like static. In the bunkhouse, Nora sat on her mattress and unfolded the paper. The handwriting was neat and deliberate. You don't build strength by breaking spirit. You grow it gently, like a tree. Water, light, patience. Don't forget this, she didn't. That night, with the lights dimmed and the other girls asleep, Nora opened her journal. She didn't write about her parents. She didn't write about home. She wrote about what she would do if she ever got out. She imagined a building, not a camp, not a clinic, but something warm. A place for people who had been bent, but not broken. She made lists. She sketched floor plans. She drafted names. Every line she wrote pushed the walls of Lark Hill back a little more. The drawer under her bunk was shallow and splintered, but just wide enough. She took a broken pencil from her nightstand and carved 4 words into the wood, pressing down hard. "One day, I'll come back stronger." Nora thought no one was listening until she read a letter meant for someone else. She was folding sheets beside Mrs. Ellery in the infirmary, the quiet hum of the fan brushing over their shoulders. The linen smelled of lemon and lavender, warm from the dryer. It was one of those thick-aired afternoons in late summer, the kind that left everything soft and sleepy. Outside, distant music floated over the fence, banjos, laughter, a faint echo of kids playing sack races. Lakewood's annual Labor Day picnic was in full swing just beyond the trees, but in here, it was only the shuffle of fabric and the whisper of tired bones. "Not many volunteers come to help in here," Ellery said gently, folding a towel with slow precision. "I like the quiet," Nora murmured, her fingers smoothing a pillowcase, "and the air smells better than the barracks." That earned her a faint smile. As Ellery stepped away to check the supply shelf, Nora reached into the laundry bin for another sheet and felt her fingers catch on something stiff. Tucked between the layers was an envelope, yellowed at the corners, the flap long unsealed. It was addressed in neat cursive, but the postmark had faded beyond recognition. On the front, "Return to sender, undeliverable." Nora hesitated. This got stuck in the sheets. Ellery turned, eyes falling on the envelope. She froze, her hands pausing midair. For a long second, she just stared at it. Then she nodded slowly. "You can read it," she said quietly. "It's all right." Nora sat on the edge of the supply cart, hands careful as she opened the flap. The paper inside was creased and delicate, like something sacred. The letter was dated 1992. The handwriting trembled in places, but the words were firm. "Dear Miss Grant, you told me I was still worth something. I didn't believe it then, but I carried those words in my back pocket all the way through college. I made it. I got out. I wanted you to know that." It wasn't signed with a full name, just M. Nora blinked, her throat tight. She glanced up. Ellery was looking away now, fussing with a bottle of antiseptic that didn't need rearranging. "That letter," Nora said, voice barely audible. "It meant something, didn't it?" Ellery nodded, eyes still turned. "They all do, child, even the ones that never get mailed." Later that day, back in the barracks, Nora sat cross-legged on her bunk. Her journal was open, blank, but instead of writing about herself, she tore out a page and scribbled a short note. "You're not invisible. I see how hard you try. That matters." She folded it into a square, tucked it into an envelope, and slipped it under Becca's pillow. She did the same for Toby the next night. Just a simple sentence. "You're stronger than they've led you to believe." She didn't sign them. Becca never said a word, but the next morning, there was a folded paper heart on Nora's bed, cut from the corner of a food wrapper. A quiet thank you, sealed in silence. The following afternoon, as Nora walked across the yard, a familiar figure waited by the perimeter fence. Mr. Walter Grant, suspenders neat and hat tilted back, held a picnic basket in one hand and a small tin in the other. "Peach cobbler," he said when Nora approached. "Still warm." "I can't take that," she said, looking around for an instructor. "It's for Ellery," he said, but then added with a wink, "Reckon she'll need help carrying it back." She took it, not for herself, but for the woman who folded hope into every towel. That night, with the lights out and the fan clicking like a heartbeat, Nora found another note on her bunk. She unfolded it slowly. "Thank you," it read in narrow handwriting. "Toby's." She lay back in bed, staring at the ceiling, not tired, not restless, just filled with something new, something small and strong. As Nora walked to breakfast, Toby trailed behind her and whispered, "Thank you." After 13 months of silence, her sister Sadie came to visit, carrying the wrong kind of apology. Nora had been told the night before, with the usual brevity Sergeant Doyle reserved for announcements that didn't concern drills. "Visitor for Beckett, 900, courtyard." No elaboration, no expression. Just a flick of his wrist as he turned away. Now, sitting on a splintered bench in the designated visitor area, Nora smoothed the hem of her regulation khakis and stared at the fall decorations strung around the fence. Plastic cornucopias, sagging paper leaves, a scarecrow that looked like it had seen one too many seasons. Beyond the chain link, she could hear laughter from town. Lakewood's annual Harvest Festival was in full swing. There were hay bales and cider stands, a pie contest, maybe even a dunk tank. Nora couldn't see it, but she could feel it, like warmth through a closed window. The gate creaked open. Sadie stepped inside, hesitantly, holding a brown paper bag in both hands. Her hair was longer than Nora remembered, curled at the ends, and she wore makeup that looked carefully effortless. She smiled too quickly. "Hey, Nora," she said, her voice catching slightly. Nora didn't stand. "Sadie." They sat across from each other on the bench, a fold-up table between them. Sadie placed the bag down and opened it with exaggerated care. "I brought some snacks. They said I couldn't bring homemade, so—" Out came a pack of trail mix, a granola bar, a plastic bottle of grape juice. She lined them up like offerings. Nora glanced at them. "Mom's idea?" Sadie flinched. "Number mine. She said, maybe you'd made your point." Nora's gaze hardened. "I didn't send a message." "I know." Sadie looked down, then back up. "I just wanted to see you. I didn't know what it would be like here." Nora said nothing. The wind tugged at the fake leaves strung along the fence, making them flutter like they were trying to escape. Sadie shifted, her fingers twisting in her lap. "Ellery wrote to Mom," she said suddenly. "Months ago, said you were doing well, that you were helping others. Mom tore it up before Dad could even read it." Nora's breath caught, but she kept her face still. "Of course she did." Sadie blinked, visibly flustered. "I didn't know, I swear. I thought maybe you weren't writing because you were mad. Not because—" "Not because they cut me off?" Nora interrupted. "Not because they sent me here like I was a problem to be fixed and then pretended I didn't exist?" Sadie's voice wavered. "I don't know how to fix this." Nora reached under the bench and pulled out a wrapped bundle. Inside was her journal, worn, dog-eared. The elastic band stretched. She placed it gently on the table. "You don't need to fix it," she said. You just need to see it. Sadie hesitated, then opened the journal. The first page stared back at her, plain and unflinching. Things I was never allowed to say. She read in silence. The words didn't need explanation. They were the spaces between the dinners where Nora had been ignored, the punishment masked as discipline, the praise always given to someone else. After a long pause, Sadie looked up, her voice small. Why didn't you tell me it was this bad? I tried, Nora said. You just weren't listening. Sadie reached out as if to take Nora's hand, but stopped halfway. I'm listening now. Nora nodded once. That's a start. They sat quietly after that, the wind picking up the scent of cinnamon and hay from beyond the fence. A family's laughter drifted from the parking lot. A boy somewhere shouted about apple bobbing. From a distance, Ellery watched them, hands folded, expression unreadable. Sadie eventually stood. Can I write to you? Nora met her eyes. Sure, just don't expect a reply right away. Sadie gave a soft smile. I'll take what I can get. As she walked away, Nora watched her back. Smaller somehow than before. Not in stature, but in certainty. And maybe that was a good thing. Sadie opened to the first page. The title reads, Things I Was Never Allowed to Say. 13 years later, Nora received one of her own letters, marked undeliverable. It was a pale gray envelope, aged around the edges, with her own handwriting in the corner and no return address. It had arrived quietly, slipped into a stack of mail at her Austin office, nestled between a donor receipt and a magazine about nonprofit leadership. She recognized the envelope instantly, the way one remembers a scar from childhood. Faint but permanent, the mailroom must have tossed it in without realizing. She turned it over slowly. No postmark, no explanation. Just that brutal black stamp, undeliverable. She sat back in her chair, the early morning sun streaking across her desk, catching on a photo frame, Mrs. Ellery seated in a garden, her cane resting beside her. The photo had been taken last spring after Nora had finally convinced her to retire to a small cottage near the foothills where she could garden and boss around birds instead of teenagers, as she'd put it. The door creaked open. Karen, her assistant, leaned in holding her phone. You'll want to see this, she said, her eyes bright. It's from a Claire Doyle. Nora blinked. The name stirred something quiet. Karen continued, She's Sergeant Doyle's daughter. Says she just finished her master's in social work and read your story in the Chronicle. Wants to thank you for helping fund her tuition. Nora took the phone, scanning the message. Claire had written about remembering Nora from visiting days, about how her father never stopped talking about that Beckett girl who always stood her ground, and how, years later, that story had helped Claire choose her own path to help kids who didn't fit into the neat boxes adults built for them. Nora smiled, just barely. By noon, she was on the road to Lakewood. She hadn't been back in nearly a decade. The town looked smaller than she remembered, quieter, more worn at the edges. But Mabel's diner still stood on the corner of Main and Pine, its red neon sign buzzing faintly against the fall sky. Inside, the booths were the same faded turquoise. The pie cooler still spun slowly behind the counter. Mrs. Ellery sat at their usual table, cane propped beside her, a cup of coffee steaming gently in front of her. You're late, she said without looking up. I brought apologies, Nora replied, holding up a paper bag. Apple pie, no raisins. That's the only acceptable kind. They settled in, conversation flowing like a creek after rain. Ellery's laugh was quieter now, but her eyes still cut sharp when Nora got too sentimental. I got a letter back, Nora said finally, placing the envelope on the table. Ellery raised a brow. From whom? Me. Nora tapped the stamp. One of the ones I sent from Larkhill. Never made it out, apparently. Ellery ran her finger over the envelope. Guess some truths just take their time. Outside, the wind rustled the yellowing trees. Inside, the jukebox played a slow Elvis tune. A waitress with silver hair and a polka dot apron refilled their coffee and asked if they wanted whipped cream on the pie. Always, Ellery said. Later that afternoon, Nora walked past the park bench near the old Lark Hill grounds, now converted into a veterans retreat center. She placed a small bouquet of marigolds beneath it. A brass plaque glinted in the sunlight. in memory of Walter Grant. Kindness, not rank, makes a man. Back in her Austin office that evening, Nora found a postcard in her inbox. It was from Becca. Still teaching. Missouri's cold this time of year. I give my students 5 minutes of silence every morning. Told them it's from a girl who once taught me that strength can be quiet. Nora turned the card over. On the back was a tiny paper heart taped in the corner. She leaned back in her chair, eyes on the fading skyline outside the window. The city glowed gold and coral, softening as it sank into dusk. Her phone buzzed. A notification from the scholarship fund. New application submitted. Under referral, it read Claire Doyle. Ellery's voice echoed in her memory. You became the kind of strong I always hoped someone here would. Nora stood, walked to the cabinet, and pulled out a box labeled in her handwriting, Letters Never Answered. She opened it slowly, placed the gray envelope inside, then shut the lid. At night, Nora filed the letter under a box labeled, Things I No Longer Carry. Sometimes the quietest battles shape the strongest hearts. Nora's story reminds us that resilience often begins where recognition ends, and the deepest strength grows in places no one else is watching. Kindness doesn't need a stage or applause. It only needs a moment, a gesture, a voice that says, I see you. Like the light from a distant porch guiding us home, one silent act of compassion can change the direction of someone's life. If this story lingered in your thoughts, perhaps today is the day to send your own quiet kindness into the world. No expectation, just faith that it matters. Because in the end, we're all just hoping someone somewhere believes we're worth the letter that never got sent. Until he found out the truth, that he was biological. But that didn't ease his mind. It only made things worse. As it turned out, the cold didn't come from being adopted. It came from blood relatives and words that no one would take back. The wind tapped the windshield. Elliot closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the seat. It was getting colder. The porch light was still on. He didn't go inside. He started the car, turned around, and parked on the corner across from the post office, where there was unlimited parking. He reclined the seat, took a thin blanket from the back seat, and lay there, in silence, with the phone face down on his chest. The screen flickered once. A text from Maya. Are you really here? He remembered everything, the way silence filled that house, louder than any voice ever could. Breakfast at Lorraine's always began with the clink of cutlery and the smell of burnt pancakes. Each slice was carefully arranged on a china plate drizzled with Vermont syrup and placed in front of Elliot's seat as if everything had happened the same 10 years before. But something was different. The silence was no longer a pause between sentences, but a wall. Lorraine poured herself coffee, not asking what he wanted. Elliot didn't blame her. He was used to it. Slept in the car all night, she asked without looking up. Yeah, Elliot said. No explanation. Maya walked in, a wool scarf wrapped around her neck, her laptop in her arms. She glanced at Elliot, then pretended to notice the bulletin board on the refrigerator. Chore lists, bills, a picture of the cat they'd once owned that was now a memory. Do you still like iced tea? She asked softly. Elliot nodded. The meal continued in silence until Lorraine's knife cut into a pancake, the sound like a scissors cutting through the curtain of his memory. He didn't need to imagine too much. Everything was still there, still in place, as if the whole house had frozen in the moment he left. Even the way his mother sat neatly at the head of the table, Maya leaned slightly as if she was afraid of taking up space, and her eyes averted when someone mentioned the past. Elliot ate slowly, saying nothing. The smell of toasted butter reminded him of another morning, when Lorraine set the pancakes down on the table and said, "This one's not ours. Look at his nose." Maya had laughed, but then stopped when she saw his face. Maya was only 10 years old. He remembered the time his mother wrapped Maya's birthday present beautifully, then forgot his own birthday just a few days later. He thought she must have forgotten. It was only later that she realized people don't forget what they've never cared about. Lorraine stood up, picked up the napkin from the table, and said over her shoulder, "I have to go out." Maya cleared the table. The door closed softly, but the sound seemed to separate Elliot from the morning. He watched her leave, then looked at Maya. She bowed her head, picked up the plate, and washed it. I know Mom never apologized, she said, her voice almost a whisper. Elliot didn't answer. Maya turned to him, her eyes filled with so much she hadn't said. But you knew, right? That the adoption thing was a joke? Elliot looked at her for a long time. I believe it. Maya frowned. 3 years. You really believe it? He nodded. Because at the time, it was easier to understand. Better than believing that you were my biological child and still being treated like that. Maya covered her mouth, but tears were welling up in her eyes. She turned away, pretending to wash the dishes, but her hands were shaking. He said softly but clearly, if they wanted you to feel like you belonged, they wouldn't have spent 3 years saying we were just kidding. Silence. Maya put the last plate on the shelf, turned around, her voice broken. That day, at school, when Mom said that in front of my friends, I didn't know what to do. Someone laughed. Then everyone laughed. I laughed too. Elliot looked at her without reproach, just let out a deep breath, as if releasing something that had been stuck in his lungs all morning. I know, he said. You're too young. Maya nodded, then, as if driven by some urge deep inside her, she walked over and pulled an old album from a drawer. She opened the middle page, pushing it toward him. This one, she pointed, do you remember? It was a picture of him standing in front of the house, dressed in his Halloween costume, and Lorraine smiling at Maya, not looking at the camera. I remember that day, Maya whispered. After the photo was taken, Mom said, you look like an adopted kid dressed like that. Elliot touched the edge of the photo, not smiling, not frowning, just staring back at the boy in the picture, standing alone in his own yard. The whole town laughed at me that whole year, he said. Every time someone asked, are you real? I didn't know how to answer.